Hey everyone, in this video we are going to do kind of a basic introduction to Microsoft Excel. We are going to talk about formatting cells and how to enter formulas into cells, how to use functions, and when entering formulas, when to use a relative address and when to use an absolute address. And then we're going to wrap it up with a little exercise in conditional formatting. So what do we have here? Let me increase the font size just a bit. This is a set of cells or a set of data or a table of data representing some scores in a class. So let's assume that you're the instructor for a class, a college class, or a high school class, I suppose, and you're using a spreadsheet to keep track of homework scores and maybe a final exam score and then a total score for the class that's weighted among the different scores. So we're gonna enter some formulas to do some calculations in a minute. But first of all, we want to take a little bit of time and do some formatting, and I'm going to show you a few tricks related to formatting. And so first of all, let's just go in and I'm going to use the basic formatting tools are right here in the Home tab. I'm going to make this bold, maybe increase the font size. You got this little increase, decrease font size tools, and maybe I'll italicize that. And then down here we have this table of data, and in this first column, we have space for a set of IDs, and what we want to do here is say like 1, 2, 3, and so forth. But rather than just manually filling in the entire list, I'm going to show you a trick. If you select those, if you enter a sequence of cells and then select those cells, there's in the selection, there's a little green rectangle that appears at the bottom right corner of that selection. If you grab that and drag it down, it basically automatically determines what sequence of numbers you've defined and then just fills that in. Now I'm gonna select undo up here, and I'm going to show you another way. Another way you can do that is you can just double click on that rectangle and it automatically fills it down. That technique is especially useful for cases where you have not just 15 rows but maybe 1,500 rows, and rather than trying to drag that down and having the worksheet scroll on you forever, you can just double click, and what it does, it looks to the columns to the left or the right to find how long the data list is in those columns, and then it tries to match that, so it works really well. There's some other things you can do with this. For example, I mean, this is we're doing 1, 2, 3, but you can do things like this: 2, 4, 6, and then have it fill in odd or even numbers, for example. Another one that I use, that I like to use quite a bit, is you can do things like this: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then it will detect that sequence. You can also do Jan, Feb, Mar, and it will determine that sequence as well. So it's kind of fun to play with. Turns out to be really useful in quickly filling in sequences of numbers. But okay, so I'm going to go back now and I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, and then I'm just going to double click on that to copy that down. And then I want this numbers to be center justified. And so to do that, I can select the column this way. If I want to select the entire column, I just put the cursor up in this bar where it says, A, B, C, so forth, and I click on that once, it'll select the entire column. But I don't. That would center justify my titles up here. So I'm just going to do. I'm going to go right here, and then I'm going to go into the alignment section and click center. And then maybe what I want to do for the names, I want them to be left justified. But from column C over to column K, I want everything to be center justified. And so I'm going to click up in the header for the columns and just drag over to the right. So once again, I click, and with the mouse button down, I just drag that over, and I can select all of those columns at once. And then I can do the center justification, then everything is center justified. Now the next thing we want to play with a little bit is the column widths. So let's suppose, for example, I want to make this first column a little smaller to just fit these IDs. The way you do that, one of the ways you do that is if you go up to these headers up here, there's a line in between the A and the B and the B and the C, so forth. And when you hover your cursor over that, it changes to this little resize icon or cursor. And if you click and drag, you can resize that column width. And another thing you can do is if you double click on you don't need to select that, but if you just double click on the border between a set of columns, it will automatically resize the column on the left to just fit the data that it has. So let me do that again. So you double click and it just goes big enough to fit those data. And now another thing you can do is you can select an entire set of columns at once and then double click on that border, and it automatically fits everything to just fit its contents, which is kind of nice. But sometimes you want things to be uniformly spaced. So for example, I might want this part of the table all to have the same column width. There's a quick way to do that as well without doing each one individually and trying to manually eyeball those to line them up to be the same width. Just select all of those columns and then just click on any one of the borders between it and select a width, and then everything that you have selected gets that same width. And so, for example, this would be a good way to fit that size, to fit those columns to a uniform size that seems to fit everything. By the way, you notice up here that I've got this information entered in cell A1. It says grading spreadsheet, but it overlaps into cells columns B and C. The same with this one. And why does it do that? Well, if I go into B1 and I just type something, then it gets obscured. So if you have something in the next column to the right, it just hides. You can only see part of it unless you expand that width. But if those columns are empty, then it expands over and covers as many cells as it needs, which is kind of nice. Another way to deal with data spanning multiple columns is you can select a set of cells and then click on this merge and center button. And what that does is it merges those 3 cells I had selected into a single cell. They're referred to as A1, which is the cell in the upper left corner of that selection. And that allows me to just force some text or something to span exactly the columns I want it to span. So that's another way to do it. But I'm going to turn that off for now. We don't need it here. And so, okay, I'm going to save my changes. And what are we going to do next? Let's do some more formatting. Another thing that is kind of nice is when you're dealing with a table is to put borders on it. So I'm going to select this part of the table just by clicking and dragging. And then I'm going to go right here. There's a border column. And I'm going to select all borders, and that puts a single width border around all of those cells. Now, even without putting borders on, you can see little grid lines in here, but these grid lines help you know which cell you're selecting and which cell you're in. Sometimes if you have a table of information and you put borders on it, it kind of makes it look a little cleaner and more professional. If you go into the View tab, and there's a grid lines toggle right here, you can turn off those grid lines. So now those grid lines are gone. You can still select individual cells, and it shows you which column and row is associated with that cell. And up here it says D23, so you can easily determine where you are. And anyway, we're gonna try that for this one, and then I'm also going to come up here and maybe go back to the Home tab and put some more borders. If you just select some cells, and then now that you've selected the all borders default for your cell borders, if you just click on that again, it will add the borders. Let's do a little number formatting now. So what we have up here at the top is this 20 up above this column means this homework assignment is worth 20 points. This one is worth 30 points. This one is worth 30 points, and so forth. And now up here, the second row up here basically says this homework total. We're going to put a formula here to calculate the total homework score. That's worth 40%, and the final exam is worth 60%. So I want to format these two numbers as percentages. So I just highlight them, and then I go up here into the number formatting and click on percent, and that formats them as a percentage. Now, it still is interpreted as 0.4 and 0.6, but it just displays it with a little bit nicer formatting. And now at this point, I could type 50 and hit enter, and since that's formatted as a percentage, that really means 0.5, but I can just go ahead and type it as 50%. Let me change that back to 40%. So that's kind of nice. Another thing that you can do, you can change the number of decimal places that are displayed, but I'm going to leave that at 40% in this case. But we'll use these two tools right here. Will increase or decrease the decimal on your numbered cells. And so again, so at this point we have text in our cells, we have numbers, and in a minute we're going to do some formulas. I want to do one other thing here. Some other things you can do for your formatting. Sometimes to make my heading pop, you can make it bold, but another thing you can do is you can fill it with a dark color, for example black, and then change the font color to white. So there, that looks kind of nice. Let me do the same thing here, and up here, and maybe I'll make my numbers over here do the same format. Now, by the way, once you've applied a certain kind of formatting to a cell, and if you want to apply that to some other cells, instead of repeating that whole process, you can select the cell with the formatting that you like, and then click on this little paintbrush format painter tool up here, and then that changes the cursor to a little paintbrush. And if you then select another set of cells, it applies or copies the formatting of the cell or cells that you had previously selected. So that's another one that we're going to use quite a bit. And finally, I'm going to make the numbers, I'm going to give them kind of a different color, maybe a blue with a white font. So now we have this nicely formatted worksheet. So we'll save our changes, and now I think we're ready to start entering some formulas. So I'm going to go right here, and let's suppose I want to calculate the total homework scores as the sum of each of these 5 individual homework scores to the left. Now there are a couple ways we're going to do that using a formula. And there are a couple of ways to do that. One way is you could type equals, which is what we do anytime we enter a formula. And then you could type C6 plus D6 plus, and I could individually type in the addresses of each of these cells. Or instead of typing in the address, you can just click on the cell and then plus click, and I could do that all the way across, but that's not a very efficient way to do it. A more efficient way is to use the sum function. So I'm going to type SUM. This is one of the built-in functions for Excel, and there are hundreds of functions that you can use. So I type SUM open paren, and then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to click and drag to select that range of cells, C6 colon G6. Now I could have just typed that in, but it's typically easier to click on the cell or set of cells, and then I'm going to do close paren, so equals sum C6 colon G6, and that basically just adds up all the numbers in that range of cells. Now I want to apply that same formula to each of these other cells, and there are a couple ways I can do that. I can just say right click and do copy, and then select these cells and do paste, and that copies the formulas down. Or I'm going to do undo here. I can select that cell and take that little green rectangle square at the bottom corner of the cell and drag it down, and that also copies that formula down. So it's kind of like a copy paste option. Or I just did undo again. I did Control or Z to undo that. Or I can double click on that little rectangle and it copies that formula down, and all of those will copy that down. So in each case now, as I go down here, what it does is it creates a formula that sums all of the cells over to the left. Now this is an example of a relative address. So when I type this in and I do C6 colon G6, what that really means is go over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and sum up everything from there to one cell to the left. And then so it's referencing that range C6 to G6 in a position relative to the cell where I'm entering the formula. So when I copy that down, in the next row it's C7 to G7, C8 to G8. Now, as an alternative, if I put my cursor in that formula and I hit the F4 key and do that to the left side, and I change that to $C, $6, $G, $6, that creates what is called an absolute address. And you can manually type those dollar signs in, or you can hit the F4 key while the range is selected, and it'll automatically put those in for you. And if I then copy that down, it doesn't change the formula when it copies down. It always references the exact same range of cells. So that's what happens with an absolute address. So really, when you're dealing with relative versus absolute addresses, it's only important in the context of copying and pasting that formula to another set of cells. If you're never going to do that, it doesn't matter. But if you are, it matters a lot. So clearly in this case, we want a relative address. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to select that entire range up in the formula bar. So by the way, if you want to edit a formula, you can click on the cell containing the formula and then go up into the formula bar and edit it. Or you can actually just double click in the cell and edit it right inside the cell. So I'm going to select that entire address there, and I'm going to hit the F4 key again, and then hit it a couple more times, and it changes it back to a relative address. And then I'm going to copy that down, and we're back in business. Okay, the next thing I do is I want to copy that formula up here to cell H4 so I can sum up the total of the points possible. So if I do copy and then paste, it copies the formula, but it copies not just the formula but the formatting as well. And here on the right, this little pop-up menu comes up and it says, okay, all I want to do is paste the formulas. By default, it pastes everything. But you can paste the formulas, you can paste the formulas in the number formatting, you can do just the values, you have a bunch of different options here, but all I want to paste is the formula and not the formatting, so I'm going to change that. And so now I've got the formula copied, but it preserves the formatting I had originally on that cell. Now, by the way, you notice this little, it looks like an army of ants marching around the cell. That means that that cell is currently on the clipboard. Something that's kind of unique to Microsoft Excel is this, sometimes they call this a barber pole highlight, but it shows you what is currently on the clipboard. And if you want that to go away, you just hit the escape key and it goes away, and now there's nothing on the clipboard. All right, let's keep going. The next thing we're going to do is calculate the total score, which is the sum of the homework total and the final total. And again, in this case, we'll do it without the summation or the sum function. We'll just do equals that cell plus this cell. We're going to make that a relative address and then copy that down. So that was easy. And now finally, what we want is the homework total as a percentage. And to do this, this is a little tricky. We want this to be a weighted percentage. So we want it to be, so the homework percentage would be, in this case, 56 divided by 135. And but then we want to multiply that by its weight, which is 40%. So what we want to do here is we want to say this score divided by the total possible times 0.4 plus this divided by 100 times 0.6, and that will give us a weighted percentage. So let's do that real quickly. So I'm going to say equals this, and to do divide you do a / this and times that plus this cell / this times, and to do the times you do the asterisk, which is Shift 8. And so there's our formula. And so the weighted percent is 60.6879, so 68.79%. We'll format that in a minute. And now I want to copy that down. So when I copy it down, I want you to notice something bad happens. We get this pound value things, and then we have 939%. So clearly things aren't going correctly. But if we look at this next formula, we'll see what happens. If I click on that over here in the formula bar, what it does is it highlights the cells that are referenced by that formula. And so now it's taken 34 divided by this, not by a number, but by this text string, which is our header, and multiplying it by 135. And so what happened here is I used all relative addresses when I made that formula, when in fact what I should have done is used a combination of relative and absolute addresses. And so I'm going to go back here. Let's see, I hit the escape key to get out of that. So what I really want to say here is I want these scores here, I want that to be relative. I always want it to be, as I copy that down, I want that always to refer to, so for this number 56 and 87, I want those two to be relative because that is always going to be on the same row as where my formula is. But these numbers up here, I want to always refer to those same rows. So I want these to be absolute. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to put the cursor inside H4, which is this 135, and I'm going to hit F4 to make it absolute. And then I'm going to do H3, which is this number here, and make that absolute. And I'm going to do the same thing for I4 and I3. And again, that F4 key is really nice when you're doing this. It saves you the hassle of typing all those dollar signs. And if you happen to be working in the Mac version of Excel, instead of F4, it's Command T, as in Tango. It does the same thing. So I'm going to hit Enter now, and now I'm going to copy that down, and now you will see that we have the correct formula all the way down, and it works like a charm. So I'm going to, let's format this column as a percentage, and maybe give it one number past the decimal place for formatting. So that looks very nice. So, so now we've got the right scores, and let's suppose, just for the sake of argument, that another thing we want to add here is down here at the bottom. Maybe we want to have 3 rows of numbers that represent some statistics. For example, maybe we want to do the min score, the mean or average score, and then the max score. Okay, and maybe do a little formatting on that. I'm going to right justify that, and then in this cell here, I'm going to use the built-in Excel function called MIN that calculates the minimum number in a range of cells, and I'm going to just drag to select that range, so C6 to C20, and hit Enter. And then for the mean, I'm going to use the average function, AVERAGE, and hit Enter. And then for the max, I'm going to do equals MAX, open paren, select that. Now, by the way, when you're doing something like this, which is a simple function, you don't necessarily have to type that close paren. You can just hit Enter, and it'll automatically do it for you if you're super lazy. And then what I'm going to do is we want to copy this formula over to the right, and it's relative, which is what it should be, because we want it to always get the min, the mean, the max of all the cells just above it. So I'm going to take that rectangle over here, and I'm just going to drag that to the right to copy that over. And now we have our statistics. So let's do a little formatting. I'm going to select these numbers here and maybe change that to, I'm going to just play with the, let's play with the increase, decrease decimal to where there's one number past the decimal point. And then over here, I'm going to change that to a percentage and increase the decimal. And that looks pretty good. So let's also go in here. Let's maybe put some borders on this, and put a little background color if you want. And down here, maybe we'll do that same black fill with white text trick that we've been doing. And yeah, there you have it. Very nice looking set of numbers. And so finally, I want to show you one other thing here. And that is something called conditional formatting. And so you'll note at the bottom here, we have the minimum score, which is right here, Mary Morton, and then the maximum score, which is 20, which is right here, Willie Worthen. And it would be kind of nice if we could immediately highlight the max and the min scores in each of these columns. And one way to do that is something called conditional formatting. So I'm going to select this set of cells, and I'm going to go up here and highlight conditional formatting. And there's a number of different kinds of conditional formatting. If you just kind of move your cursor over these but not select them, it will preview them. You can actually have the values filled in with colors or data bars that allow you to quickly get a feel for the high and low values, you know, how the numbers are distributed. A lot of these aren't terribly useful in my opinion. The color bars are kind of nice, but we're going to do something different here. We're going to do highlight cell rules And so you can set it up to automatically highlight cells with particular colors and formatting if they're greater than a certain value or less than a certain value or between a range of values and so forth. But in this case, we want to do the equal to option. And it says format cells that are equal to what? And I'm going to, whenever you see this little symbol next to a text box, it means that you can actually click on a cell. And I'm going to click on this cell down here. And that is, and so it says format cells that are equal to, and then it puts in a formula. It says equals $C, $22. So, and you could do times 12, or you could put any kind of formula in here you want. But we want it to say equal to this cell. And then we're going to do, this is the min, so we're going to use the default formatting, light red fill with dark red text, as shown over here. But I want to change something. I'm going to change this. Instead of saying $C, $22, I want it to say just C, $22. So what that means is look in the same column that you're currently in, but always look at row 22. So no matter which of these cells over here we're applying this formatting to, we say go straight down in the same column and look at row 22. Now the reason I got rid of that $sign is we're going to copy that formatting to these other columns, and we want it to always reference the value in the same column but in row 22. So to do that, we have to use this combination of relative and absolute addressing. So you can mix and match those $signs. So again, this means stay in the same column but always look at row 22. And we're going to click OK. And then with that selected, I'm going to apply another conditional formatting rule to highlight the cell with the maximum value. So I'm going to go back up here, and you can just layer these on top of one another. So I'm going to do highlight cell rules equal to, and in this case I'm going to change the formatting to green, and I'm going to change the formula to, I'm going to point down to this max value. I'm going to change it again to be C, $24, and click OK. So now we have two rules that are applied. And by the way, if you ever want to see what rules you have, you can go down and select Manage Rules, and it shows you here are the two rules. You can delete one or both of them. You can edit the rule. You can even create new rules from here, although it's a little more complicated to do it here. And so now look at that, I have these formulas, and if I change this to a higher number, then it highlights a different score. So it'll automatically highlight those as you enter the scores, which is really cool. So that's why it's a kind of a dynamic formatting based on certain conditions. Now what I want to do is I want to apply that same conditional formatting to the rest of the table. And to do that, we're going to use our little paint friend. So we're going to select that column, click on the paintbrush, and then just go just like that. And it worked. Now, one problem with doing it that way is it wiped out my our percentage formatting over here. So let's just reapply that. So it didn't it copied not just the conditional formatting, but all of the formatting. But no problem, we can fix that very easily. So now there we go. We have all of our formulas. We learned about relative versus absolute addressing. We learned about how to enter functions, and we learned about conditional formatting. So that concludes this exercise. We're going to revisit this same worksheet in a later video, and when we learn about VLOOKUP, or the lookup function. But that concludes our exercise for today.